Every Sunday morning in the tiny hamlet of Hickory Ridge, the same smell would drift through the valley: warm apples, cinnamon, and butter melting into crust. Folks said you could follow that smell clear down to the river bend. It came from the small cabin perched on Widow Langley's hill, a lonely little place shaded by sycamores and silence. No one really knew the widow well. She kept to herself, gray-haired and soft-spoken, always wearing the same faded blue dress and white apron. Every week, she baked 3 pies, golden, glistening, perfect, but no one ever saw anyone eat them. Children dared each other to run up her lane at night, whispering that she was a witch who poisoned men in the war. Adults dismissed it as foolish talk, yet even they crossed to the other side of the street when she came down for supplies. The storekeeper, old Mr. Greaves, swore she hadn't bought more than a sack of flour, a few apples, and some sugar in 5 years. "Just enough for them pies," he'd grumble, "and not a soul's ever had a slice." The hills whispered her name like a prayer no one dared finish. In early autumn of 1892, a stranger rode into town, a newspaper man from St. Louis named Thomas Hale. He was young, ambitious, chasing rumors of a haunted widow who baked death pies. To him, it was a curiosity, perfect for a feature story in the Missouri Chronicle. When he asked around, folks turned cold. No one wanted to talk, but an old farmer named Jed Turner spat tobacco and said, "You want to talk to Widow Langley, son, you best bring flowers to the churchyard first. Her husband's buried there, and so are the last 3 fellas who tried her pies." Thomas thought it was an exaggeration, but the names were there on the mossy headstones. Eli Langley, 1863 Reverend Cole, 1871 Deputy Rourke, 1885. Each man had died within a day of visiting the widow. The town's superstition had sealed her fate long ago, but Thomas, being a city man, didn't believe in curses. He believed in stories, and this was one begging to be told. So he made up his mind. He'd meet the widow himself. The path to Widow Langley's cabin wound through whispering pines and patches of goldenrod. The smell of baking pies grew stronger as he approached. He knocked, heart thudding. After a long pause, the door opened a crack. A pair of kind blue-gray eyes met his. "Yes?" she said softly. "My name's Thomas Hale. I write for the Chronicle. I heard tell of your pies, ma'am." She blinked, uncertain. "You came all this way for a pie?" He nodded with a smile. After a pause, she said, "Then you'd best come in. But you won't eat what you don't understand." The inside of her home was simple: wood stove, checkered curtains, and a shelf lined with jars of preserves. 3 fresh pies cooled on the sill, steam curling in the sunlight. Thomas asked questions gently, about her husband, about her baking, about why she never sold the pies at market. She stirred tea, eyes distant. "My husband Eli loved my pies," she said. "Said they reminded him of home, even when war took every bit of it. When he never came back, I kept baking for him. Couldn't stop." She smiled faintly. "You bake for the one you miss most. Maybe that's foolish, but foolishness keeps a soul alive." Thomas, moved but skeptical, asked if he could try one. Her expression hardened. "No one eats them," she whispered. "Why?" he asked. She turned away. "Because they're meant for the lost." He thought it was metaphorical, a poet's phrase from a grieving woman. But something in her tone chilled him. Still, she promised to tell him everything, if he'd return the next day. "Bring a candle," she said. "I bake after dusk, and that's when the truth walks in." That evening the hills grew heavy with fog. Thomas climbed back up the path, candle-lantern in hand. From inside the cabin came the sound of soft humming, a lullaby. Through the window, He saw her placing 3 empty chairs at her small wooden table. Then she took 3 steaming pies from the oven and set one before each chair. "Eli," she whispered to the empty air. "Reverend Cole, Deputy Rourke, your places are ready." Thomas froze. Her voice trembled with tenderness, as if she heard them answer. He watched from the window, heart pounding. She bowed her head as though saying grace. For a moment the room seemed to shift. The air thickened, the candlelight flickered. And though the chairs remained empty, the floorboards creaked as if unseen feet had crossed them. The widow smiled faintly, tears glistening in her eyes. When she finally blew out the candles, Thomas stumbled away, shaken. Was she mad? Haunted? Or had grief itself created something too deep for reason to touch? The next morning, Thomas returned to town, pale and shaken. He told no one what he'd seen, but his silence made the locals talk even more. They saw the candlelight up on the hill and said, "Another one's fallen under her spell." Old Mrs. Harper at the post office crossed herself. "Them pies ain't food," she muttered. "They're offerings." And that night, as the fog rolled in again, the smell of cinnamon drifted stronger than ever, like the ghosts of the hills themselves had grown hungry. The next morning, Thomas Hale sat on the porch of the boarding house, staring at the hills wrapped in mist. Sleep had not come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard that creaking floorboard, saw those empty chairs, and smelled the faint sweetness of baked apples. He told himself he'd imagined it. That grief could drive anyone to ritual, to ghosts of memory. But something inside whispered otherwise. By noon, he'd decided he had to go back. Not as a reporter this time, but as a man trying to understand a soul left behind. When he arrived, the widow was sitting by the window with a letter in her lap. The seal was cracked, the paper yellowed by time. "It's from my Eli," she said quietly. "Last one he sent before the war took him." Her voice quivered as she read, "Don't stop baking, Mary. Your pies are the taste of home. Promise me you'll bake one for every soul lost. They deserve sweetness after all this bitterness." Tears welled in her eyes. He died 2 weeks later at Shiloh. They say he never made it home, but I keep his promise. Every pie I bake is for someone who didn't come back. Thomas sat in stunned silence. The pies weren't poison. They were memorials. She smiled sadly. "After the war, I started baking every Sunday. One pie for Eli, one for Reverend Cole. He was the only one who'd still visit me. And one for the deputy who used to check on me when folks talked cruel." Her eyes softened. "They all passed on. And yet I still bake. Because sometimes, late at night, I feel them sit with me. Not ghosts, Mr. Hale. Just memories that refuse to die." Thomas realized she wasn't cursed. She was faithful. Her home wasn't haunted. It was hallowed. That evening he returned to town with a new perspective. But when he tried to tell folks the truth, they scoffed. "Don't be fooled, son," said Jed Turner. "She's bewitched you same as them others." Even the pastor frowned. "Grief can open doors best left closed. Leave her be." The townsfolk preferred fear over compassion. It was easier to condemn than to understand. Thomas saw in them the cruelty that loneliness breeds in small places. So he decided, if no one else would listen, he would write her story himself, truthfully. The next evening, Thomas returned one last time to bid farewell. He found the widow at her stove again, baking. Only this time, there were 4 pies cooling on the sill. "You expecting guests?" he asked gently. She smiled. "Yes. 3 I've known for years. And one who came all the way from St. Louis to listen." He blinked. "You baked one for me?" She nodded. "Everyone who carries the story of the lost deserves a taste. But wait until it's time." As they sat talking, the sky darkened. Thunder rolled through the valley and the rain came hard. The widow covered her pies, humming softly, a hymn about coming home. Thomas helped her bar the door against the storm. When lightning struck a tree nearby, the cabin shook. She smiled calmly. Eli used to say storms were just heaven clearing its throat before a new day. Her faith humbled him. This woman, scorned for years, still spoke with gratitude. He decided he'd stay the night, just to be sure she was safe. Near midnight, Thomas woke to a strange glow. He sat up, heart pounding. In the kitchen, the widow stood before her table, 3 candles burning bright. The same 3 chairs were there, but this time Thomas swore he saw figures in the flickering light, shadows shaped like men, smiling faintly. Eli in his uniform, Reverend Cole in his collar, Deputy Rourke with his badge. They seemed peaceful, grateful. Mary Langley turned toward them and said softly, "Your promise is kept." Every soul remembered, every name spoken. Then she turned to the 4th pie and whispered, "And this one, for the man who listened." At dawn, Thomas awoke in his chair by the fire. The storm had passed, birds were singing. The air smelled of baked apples and wood smoke, but the widow's chair was empty. He called her name, no answer. Then he saw her, seated peacefully by the window, hands folded in her lap, eyes closed. She was gone. On the table lay a note written in delicate script. "You kept your promise too, Mr. Hale. You saw me not as a ghost, but as a woman who remembered love." A single slice of pie sat on a plate beside the note. Thomas sat for a long time, staring at that slice. The sunlight caught the golden crust, glinting like the edges of memory. Finally, he took a bite. It was warm and perfect. Apples, cinnamon, and something else. Peace. He felt no chill, no curse. Only a strange, gentle warmth, as if unseen hands had rested on his shoulders. Tears filled his eyes. "You weren't baking for the dead," he whispered. "You were baking to keep love alive." Outside, the hills seemed to breathe again. Weeks later, Thomas published his article, "The Widow Who Baked for the Lost." He wrote of grief, of devotion, of how love can live in rituals the world misunderstands. The story spread far beyond Hickory Ridge. People sent letters, prayers, even recipes inspired by her pies. The widow's name, Mary Langley, became a symbol of remembrance, not fear. A year later, a new bakery opened in the valley, built where her cabin once stood. Its sign read, "Langley's Pies, baked in memory, served with love." And every Sunday, the scent of cinnamon drifted once again through the Ozark hills, sweet, familiar, eternal, a promise kept.